while running everything from my phone.
No, I get it. It wasn't, I was trying to get on early and that
I
wasn't
understand.
happening.
No problem. So, okay. So, again, thank you, everybody. We have a full house today. We have a number of people from, looks like the Romance Writers Association has begun to join us. And we thank you guys for attending again. I believe this might be the first meeting where we actually have a presentation. Last week was more of a get to know everybody, which I thought was really nice a couple weeks ago. And then we're lucky enough to have Joel today here to talk about our, giving presentations and how important
Yeah.
communication
Yeah,
is
just like here.
to,
Sorry.
how important, no, it's okay. How important communication is to, pitching your ideas, selling your books, just communicating if you do any type of media, interviews and things like that. We have another presentation in a couple of weeks around interviews. And so we're kind of, getting us all geared up for that. I'd like to mention that I put a link in the chat for everybody to sign up to the newsletter to make sure you get the announcements for these meetings. I send out typically 2 announcements, one announcing the meeting and then a follow-up resend, just to remind you today that you have the meeting today, and it's a nice reminder for people. We know a lot of people have signed up for the membership in the last few weeks, and we appreciate that. Thank you so much for doing that. I encourage everybody to go ahead and send in your dues. If you have any questions, we'll try to answer that in the comments in the chat. We can take that offline. I know a number of people have signed up as members, and we don't necessarily have like a big welcome to email. So I know maybe there was a little bit of a confusion there, and so I apologize for that. But if you have sent your money via PayPal, we get those notifications, and we're updating our membership list, and we'll let you know maybe in a couple weeks what our current roles are, who's in there, and who maybe needs to file for their membership to be re-upped. I know I am one of those people who needs to send my money in for the membership. So that being said, also, please, if you are getting ready for this year, we're going to have hopefully a lot of events this year, as crossing our fingers as everything begins to wind down. Do go ahead and get your books ordered. Make sure you have good stock. We're going to have a lot of events coming up in the next 3 or 4 or 5 months, and hopefully through the summer we have a lot of art festivals, street fairs, a lot of great opportunities, a lot of great success in the past 2 years. Even through the pandemic, we have had some good success selling books.
I was hoping you could.
So please,
Because
yeah, so please feel free to get yourself prepared for that. We're going to go ahead and make announcements when those events are ready, and we'll happily take people who would like to attend. And you can sell some books to people that are not friends and family. All right, Joel.
All righty.
My 3-minute spiel. I hope I'm not the lead example in your whole talk. Please make sure to gray out my name for giving long-winded talks and long-winded introductions, but take it away, and I'll be here on my phone monitoring the chat and everything.
No, I only refer to you in a good way.
Yeah, M-B anonymous. All right, take it away. It's all you.
Right. All right. So today we're going to talk about presentations, and it's kind of 2 main reasons. We want to help folks, if they're going to do a presentation, to be able to do a successful presentation that when you get done, you go, yeah, I nailed it. And as far as specifically the co-op is concerned, we're trying to get more people involved in doing presentations so we can have a little more participation and have a little more variety of subjects, because I'm sure there are other folks out there that haven't done it yet that have information that would be useful, interesting to the rest of the co-op. And I know that not everybody has done it or feels comfortable doing it. And I've been doing instructing and presentations for a lot of years, classroom type presentations. I've done instructor training, and You know, a lot of the things that I picked up over the years have been either personal experience from not necessarily doing it the right way and going, oh, don't want to do that again, or just observing other people. That's always been the one of the best ways I've had of developing my own skills, just watching other folks and kind of, oh, that's how they do that. So we want to get you some tips on effectively getting your point across and not creating an ambient type presentation. Now, whether it's an online presentation or an in-person presentation, principles are the same. Some folks feel more comfortable with in-person presentations. I kind of like it because then I can see how it's going across. I can get feedback either directly or just observing the people. Am I losing folks in there? Are they just kind of doodling on their pads or aimlessly kind of looking around the room? And some folks aren't comfortable necessarily in front of a group. And it's one of those things that the more you do it, the more comfortable you get. An online presentation, you lose that ability to see your audience. On the other hand, some folks might like it better because they're almost kind of semi-autonomous. And the other thing that I just want to differentiate here is it a workshop type situation or a presentation? And the difference as far as how I'm going to refer to it today is if, for example, you're doing something on software, some kind of software program, are you going into the details, the nitty gritty of how you do it? Here's the sub menu, and then you click on this and you highlight that and going through. That's more a workshop because then you have people that are in there that realize that that's really what the presentation is about. They're interested in that particular subject. That's why they're there. As opposed to a presentation where you just aren't going into that kind of detail, but just sort of giving an overview, hitting the highlights. An important thing to really always keep in mind is the average adult attention span is 20 minutes. And at that point, they begin to space out. And TED Talks is a really good example because those are all limited to 20 minutes. 18 minutes, I'm sorry. They're limited to 18 minutes. And there's a reason for that, and that right there encapsulates the reason. People aren't going to be able to stay with you for a long period of time. Now, also, again, we want to differentiate a little bit. Are we talking about, for example, a presentation that has a lot of information that may go beyond the 20 minutes, but our sessions, is it broken up into sessions? It may either be done by actually taking a break, giving people a few minutes to sort of catch their breath, or are you switching to maybe a different part of that subject? You've covered one thing, now you're going to be trying to cover something else. We've done it here in the co-op by having different people present different portions of a particular subject. So there's, again, a number of ways of going about it, but you don't want to stay focused on the same thing for a long period of time. The other factor is people can't hold a whole lot of data, information, names, numbers, figures in their head at the same time. So you don't want to overload them, throwing at them all kinds of lists of names and websites, book titles, whatever that may be. Sort of the that old expression, don't try to cram 10 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound sack. Don't overdo it at any one time. Sort of the principle of leave them wanting more. If people have or want more information, they'll ask for it. And then that's always a good thing, because then you've piqued people's interest and they do want to hear more from you, rather than as soon as you're done, they bolt. Then, maybe it kind of went to the overload end. When you're looking at doing this, think for a minute about what's the worst presentation you ever attended. Why? What was the thing that made it really awful for you? Probably the worst presentation I ever saw a number of years ago was in San Diego, in the room had floor to window ceilings looking out on the bay with all the sailboats out there. And the guy puts up his first slide, and it's a complete page of text, which he proceeded to read in a monotone. And he read that whole thing and then put up the next slide, which was another page of text, and another and another. And nobody was focusing on him. We were all looking at the boats out in the bay and thinking, gee, all we had to do was print all this stuff up and hand us the packet, because he was adding nothing to it. So not only was he using terrible graphics, he was also reading long things on there, and again in a monotone. So that was a lesson in kind of, okay, make sure I don't do that. On the other hand, what's the most interesting presentation that you've seen? What made it interesting? What made you like it? What was it about that presenter or how they were presenting? Did they throw some little stories in there? Did they, really seem to be into their subject? Whatever it was, those are kind of the things you want to capture. And then, importantly, what was the length of the presentation? Or how long did it seem? Did it seem to go on and on and on? We've all been in those, that it was never going to end. Or at the end, after they wrapped up, did you think, wow, it's done already? That went really fast. That's kind of how you want to leave it. The other thing to keep in mind is, and this kind of will help keep you centered and keep you from going off on tangents and getting too down in the granular facts, is probably you're the one that's most interested in that subject. That's why presumably you're doing it, and that's fine. You don't want someone that is up there looking like they're bored to tears themselves, because then nobody else is going to be interested. So yeah, being enthusiastic is good. Don't go overboard with it, but basically, if you don't seem interested in it, why should anybody else? And what's the key theme, the central point? What's the most important thing that you're presenting there? When I do a lot of safety training, and I always try to have one thing that, often I will literally say, tomorrow, if you forget everything else that we did today, if you remember this, it will have been worth it. So you may not necessarily have something that you can encapsulate in one sentence like that, but what's kind of the most important thing that you want those folks at the end of the presentation to stay with them? And most people are familiar with that concept of KISS, keep it simple, let you fill in the last S yourself. And this is something that in 1960, aeronautical engineer Kelly Johnson came up with. And basically his concept, his idea was avoid unnecessary complexity. He was talking about electronic and mechanical engineering. The more complicated you make, the more likely it is for something to go wrong. But the same thing here. When you're doing a presentation, keep it simple to the basic core information. If you, again, get too off on sidetrack tangents, then again, you'll lose what was your core, and you'll probably lose at least part of your audience. Graphics can be really helpful. Some people learn primarily by listening, some by reading, some by doing. There are a number of ways we learn things. So graphics can really be very helpful to you in a presentation. It helps keep people focused. It gives them something else to have their attention on. Again, that same KISS principle. Don't make them too elaborate and involved. Just attractive, hopefully colorful. And in those graphics, bullet points. Keep it simple graphics. You don't want to put your talk verbatim on there, like that guy I talked about. He put it all on there, and that was his deal, because otherwise, what do they need you for up there? So use some graphics. It helps keep people's attention. And if you do have a bunch of information, data, websites, numbers, names, it'd be really helpful, instead of trying to have people scramble to write it all down, because now they're not able to focus on you and they probably miss part of it. If it's something that you think is helpful or important, then have some handouts. If it's in person, you can do it. You can print some out or have just e-files ready. What we've been doing here in the co-op is Matt records these presentations, and that gives you the ability online later on to go, oh man, I need those websites. So you can go back and access them. So you can focus on what the presenter is talking about and not have to be trying to write it down and get distracted, and then, oh, I missed the last thing there, and what was that? Once you've got your presentation put together, practice it, literally, out loud. The reason for that is, if you just have your presentation and you run through it silently in your head, it may not run when you do it out loud as efficiently or in the time frame or as well as you thought it was going to go. It's similar to when you do editing and you get done. If you read through it silently in your head, rather than, for example, using in Word the read aloud function, or literally yourself read it out loud or have someone else do it, you find, oh, that's not right. It sounds different than it did in my head. It also gives you the ability to gauge, how long is this really going to take? You may sometimes end up thinking it was the right amount of presentation, and you run through it out loud, and oh, that was only 15 minutes, or oops, that was 40. The other thing that I found way back was a really good learning tool. Was I was in a workshop and everybody had to do a presentation, and they videotaped it. And watching it was one of the most painful things I ever had to do. I didn't realize how many times I said things like, you know, all those fillers. And it was not what I had heard in my head. It is one of those things that most people hate hearing themselves recorded, but it's really helpful. If you have a smartphone, you've got an audio recorder. So if you don't want to have somebody critiquing you and listening, you don't feel comfortable with that, you don't even need to necessarily mess with video. Just record audio and then listen back. How does that sound to you? Not necessarily your tone or whatever, but oh, I didn't know I sounded like that. But did it go as smoothly as in your head it did? The rate when you're doing the rate of how fast you're talking is also kind of important. You don't want to speak super fast so people can't follow what you're saying. And if you go too slow, it's just going to put everybody to sleep. So normal conversational speed, I don't know if that's helpful, but I Googled that. So 140 to 170 words a minute. I have no idea how many words a minute I normally talk, but that's about the speed that is ideal. And it's very helpful. Use notes, not that kind of notes, but you want to have notes. We always think we're going to remember everything. Oh, I got this down. And then all of a sudden you kind of lose track of what you're at, where you're at, or there was some information you wanted to make sure you got across, and at the end you realize you forgot, or you didn't remember the name or the number or whatever it may be. So when I do presentations, I have notes in my own shorthand, but often I don't necessarily use them. I have them and I keep moving them along as depending on the type of presentation it is. But I find it's always helpful, especially if at some point you get interrupted or distracted, you kind of lose where you were at. It's much easier to pick up if you've got some notes in front of you. And then volume. If you're doing in-person presentations, make sure it's loud enough for the people in the back of the room to hear. There's nothing wrong with saying, "Hey, can everybody hear me back there?" rather than yelling from the back, "I can't hear you." Often that means speaking a little louder than you think you need to. And because if you speak too softly, then people are probably going to tune you out. They're going to stop paying attention. You're not going to engage them. So just sort of to sum it all up, what's the most important idea? What's your central theme? What do you want people to most importantly remember when it's all said and done? Don't get too deep in the weeds. Again, if you're doing a workshop and you're teaching people or trying to go through how to do some things, again, depending on the type of workshop you're doing, then yeah, you're probably going to get pretty granular, pretty far in there with a lot of detail. But in like this type of presentation, you don't want to go quite that far. If people want that additional information, they'll ask, or as I mentioned earlier, if you have websites you're referring to and there's more than one that's a simple one, then have that list available for them. Try to keep it short, concise, better a little too short than a little too long. We, again, have all been in those lectures, presentations, classes that seem to never end. And practice. I went through this at least twice, two and a half times, again to try to gauge the time and to make sure that it was flowing and sounded like I wanted to do it. Wanted to go rather, and maybe most important, try to have some fun doing it. You don't want to finish it going, oh my God, I just want to go shoot myself now. You just try to do the best you can with it. Again, it should be something that has some interest for you. So enjoy it as much as you can. And we're done. You there, Matt?
Awesome. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Did anybody time that? I forgot to start my stopwatch.
We 23 minutes according to the recording from when I handed it off to you.
Okay.
Joel, you've been around a lot of professionals and salespeople and whatnot, and I think when I see people selling at book events or trying to communicate to the public, we can, because we're a bunch of introvert authors, we can tend to either lock up or we give the word salad and it scares people away. How much have you seen people emulating really good speakers? Do you do research? Do you watch good speeches and then take notes? How much of I know it's practice, but it's one thing to read your talk to yourself or listen to it on an audio thing. Do you I don't know. Do you take notes on other speakers? Do you?
Well, I don't know if I don't necessarily take physical notes, but like I said, I've been doing instruction and was in sales for a long time, and the best thing that became one of my favorite things is to watch other people do it, whether it's teaching a class or doing a presentation. How are they doing it? What, not necessarily the specific script, but what are they saying? What points are they making? How do they go from one thing to another? And using, the example you were talking about with that little pitch at an event. Somebody walks up to the table. You want to have, you wrote a book. You spent a lot of time with it. You got it edited. You got it published. You got a book cover. What is it you like about that book? Be specific. Some of us have multiple books and multiple genres and multiple series. You can't dump that all on somebody in that, quick minute or two you have with them. So pick one. What, at this specific event, which series or which book do you really want to focus on? And if it's fiction, who's your favorite character? And when somebody comes up there and they say, well, what's this? What do you got here? Oh, this is great. This book is about this character that does this, this, and this, and their life turns out great, awful, whatever it is. Tell a story. You told a story in your book, pare it down to, it's sort of like the blurb on the back of your book. Like if you're telling your best friend, hey, I wrote this book, and they say what it's about, what's it about, that's what you tell them. Give them a quick 2-minute, and if you're not super comfortable with it, maybe pair up with somebody that you think is, and kind of watch what they do. That's always helpful. Obviously, their stuff is going to be different, so it's not going to word for word work for you. But just basically, what kind of things are they saying? And so, yeah, watching other people is really helpful. Again, maybe pull up some relevant TED Talks. Just kind of watch how they do it. Now, realize they're going to have more time than you have at that table, but principle is the same.
Well, we had a question from Diana regarding the difficulty of giving talks over the internet like you're doing now. And, how do you get comfortable with that? How do you know you're losing your people? We all have to do Zoom talks a lot. So because you do a lot of it, what do you do to make sure that that is relevant and connective and all that stuff?
It's really hard. Especially the ones that we do on Skype without everybody having a camera on. So it's really hard to gauge. If you're in a room with people, or even a typical Zoom meeting where you have all the people's little frames, you can see, are they watching you? Are they tracking you? Or are they looking into the camera? Or you look down, you look around, and people are flipping through pages in a book or doodling. If they're writing, that can be a good thing. But they're drawing little pictures, or they're kind of staring off into space. So it does make it harder doing online. It's a little bit helpful with the chat, and things pop up. The problem is I can't focus on what I'm doing and really read through the chats at the same time. But usually it seems when people are throwing things up in the chat, if you're doing the presentation and you see them popping up, without being able to read them, usually there's some sort of engagement there, and you got to hope it's not people having a side conversation because they're bored. So unfortunately, online meetings like this, without having everybody on camera, there's no way you can really know for sure. Any other questions?
I like to have calls to action during the talk to get them into the chat to talk. And as long as things are happening, I always think it's probably pretty good. Does anybody have any other questions? Maybe a comment you can come off mute and ask, or talk about maybe a unique challenge you might have with respect to presenting, book pitches, selling events, things of that nature.
Thanks, Tony.
What about the use of jokes? Joel, what is your stance on jokes in presentations?
A little goes a long way. Throwing something in, hang on, advice on doing a talk when you can't see the audience. Yeah, that's tough. Yeah, you want to throw something in there, just kind of lighten things up. Again, that's the use of jokes is a good thing, but you don't want to overdo that. You don't want to turn it into a stand-up comedy routine. The same thing is true of little stories. Like when I talked about the guy that wrote all the text. When I'm doing safety classes, sometimes I'll bring up a story of somebody and whatever may have happened. But again, you don't want to overload with that, because then that kind of takes. I'm sorry. I just read Tony's thing there. Yeah, don't be 5'1" with a 5-foot podium. Yeah, if you're doing in-person presentations, that is really an important thing. I know it sounds kind of funny, but have yourself positioned somewhere where people can see you and you can see them. And sometimes you don't have a podium. And again, with in person, sometimes what I would end up doing is, if they didn't have a podium available, and I had notes I needed to use. If I had them down on the table, I couldn't read it that far. I didn't want to stand there holding them, so I'd improvise and find a box and just put a box on a table and then set the notes on top of that. So, things things aren't always the way we want them to be. So you have to have some ability to be flexible and kind of do things on the fly. Stuff happens. Um, Something else let me mention, when you're doing a presentation and people have questions, that's always good. The way we've been managing it here generally is if somebody has a question, because it's in the chat, like Matt will do what he's doing and ask them at the end. If you've ever been in a meeting or a presentation where somebody has paper, a big piece of paper or area of the whiteboard, and they'll write parking lot on top, and somebody brings up a question, you want to make sure they know you're not just blowing them off. But you don't necessarily want to stop where you're at and address that right now. It may be something you're going to get to in a couple of minutes. When that happens, I'll usually say to somebody, yeah, I'm going to get to that. And after I get to that, if that still hasn't answered your question, then please ask me again. Or if it's something I wasn't going to address in detail, yeah, you can put it on that parking lot on the side and then come back to it at the end. That's helpful because you can get through. It doesn't break your rhythm, keeps things moving along, and not everybody may have interest in that particular question that's being asked. So by leaving it to the end and addressing those things or other questions that come up, then it's not super important to you if everybody in that audience is following you, because it was maybe just that one or two or three people that were wanting more information on that. Anything else? Going once, going twice. Back to Matt.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Joel, so much for that. I think that will be the conclusion of the meeting. I'll go ahead and stop the recording.